thank you very much for being here today, and thank you, CE. After I talk about him, can you believe he invited me back?
Next, we're going to hear about some of the other end of the state. So many times whenever we're in a drought like we are now, whenever we come out of it, it's usually a big flood or rain event, and actually we get floods and stuff here. But we're fortunate to have with us Jeff Lindner. He's a meteorologist with the flood operations down in Houston. And Jeff implements and communicates with the National Weather Service, Harris County Office of Emergency Management. In addition, he oversees Harris County Flood Warning System and the Discharge and Routing Curve Program, and is currently developing a real-time flood forecast system. Jeff has developed multiple presentations and prepared materials on hurricane impacts, flooding, drought, and how to prepare and respond to weather events. And we're fortunate to have Jeff here with us, and we'll come give his presentation at this time.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a little bit different in our area where y'all typically may not have enough water. We have way too much water. Except back in 2011. We did have a very significant drought back in 2011. And we were concerned at one point we weren't going to have enough water. And so everything that y'all do up here probably on a more regular basis was the first time we did that down in Southeast Texas. Anyways, a couple days ago was the 6-month anniversary of Hurricane Harvey. And it was one of the darkest hours for Harris County and the city of Houston. And so this presentation is going to cover what happened down in Houston and Southeast Texas with Harvey. And as I go through it, I'll talk through some lessons learned so that maybe y'all can implement them in y'all's area. So we fall within the San Jacinto watershed. The good news for Harris County is that we do not get water from other parts of the state, really. So the Brazos River is to our west, runs through Fort Bend County, Brazoria County down in the Gulf of Mexico. We have the Trinity to our east, which brings in water from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but neither one of those river systems directly impact the city of Houston or Harris County, so we don't get river flooding for the most part. We fall within the San Jacinto Basin. We have the West Fork that comes down from Conroe to Humble, and then the East Fork that comes down from Cleveland to Lake Houston, and everything ends up in Galveston Bay. Within the San Jacinto Basin, we have 22 watersheds in Harris County. All of our water drains from west to east. It all ends up in the San Jacinto River and Galveston Bay. None of it goes directly to the Gulf of Mexico. And each one of these 22 watersheds has its own unique flooding situation. The northern part of the county, it acts very much like a river system. Those are the creeks. They take time to rise. They stay up for an extended period of time. In the center of the county, the more urban areas, we have very large bayous, concrete lined. They come up very fast. The water gets into them very quickly, and the water also gets out of them very quickly. And so we have a lot of different flood situations that we can deal with in Harris County. The good news about the county is the rain literally has to fall on top of us for us to get flooding. Unfortunately, that happens quite a bit. We also have 2 flood control reservoirs in the western part of Harris County. These were built by the Army Corps of Engineers back in the 1940s for the protection of downtown Houston and the Houston Ship Channel. They are dry on most days. They do not impound water. They are for flood control purposes only. So as soon as you get water in them, as soon as the rain stops, the Corps of Engineers opens the floodgates and begins releasing the water. They both have floodgates on their south ends, here and here, that discharge into Buffalo Bayou. And they each have 2 spillways, one on the north end and one on the south end. So there's a total of 4 spillways on these reservoirs. I'll tell you that because we'll come back to that during this presentation. So this is Harvey, initially forming as a tropical storm in the eastern Caribbean Sea, falling apart, and then redeveloping in the Gulf of Mexico, went from a tropical depression to a Category 4, 130-mile-an-hour hurricane in 48 hours. And rapid development in the Gulf of Mexico is not something new. We've seen it before. Hurricane Alicia back in 1983 went from a depression to a Category 3 in 60 hours. And so that is not the unusual part about this storm. The unusual part about this storm is typically a hurricane making landfall in northwest track would keep moving inland, probably ending up somewhere in northwest Texas. Instead, this particular system stalled near Victoria, moved back south, and then meandered up the coast into southwest Louisiana. This was the forecast for our area on Saturday, August the 26th. And as you can see, everything in that big purple magenta area is 30 to 38 inches of rain. The forecasts for Harvey were very good. They were very good early on, all the way looking 3 and 4 days out ahead of the storm making landfall. They were excellent. The comprehension of what that amount of rain was going to do, I think, was the difficult part of the forecast. From a meteorology standpoint, from an emergency manager standpoint, and from a public standpoint. We all knew we were going to get a lot of rain. We all knew we were going to have some degree of flooding, but the spatial coverage and the amounts were just something I don't think we could really comprehend fully. And a lot of that is because we've never faced it before. We've never faced it before here in the state of Texas. We've never faced it anywhere in the nation. So this is landfall Friday evening, 10 o'clock. A well-developed Category 4. If we did not have the big flood disaster on the upper Texas coast, the story would be down in Rockport and Port Aransas, where they gusted to 151 miles an hour. And the devastation is tremendous down there. It's still very slowly coming back in that area. But Harvey would make landfall for our area. We would be fine on Friday night and Saturday. This is Saturday evening, the 26th. At about 9 o'clock. The center of the storm is right here at the edge of the radar. That's the center, still very well defined. Even though it was inland now for 24 hours, it was still a 65-mile-an-hour tropical storm. And up until this point, everything was good until this single band of very heavy rain developed on the west side of the county. Remember, our watersheds drain from west to east. And so this is developing on the upper end of our watersheds and is moving very slowly about 5 miles an hour to the east. And it's raining about 5 to 6 inches per hour under this band. This was an email I sent just after midnight on Sunday morning detailing the situation. Everybody asked me when did I know this was going to be bad, and this is when it was. We were starting to reach Tropical Storm Allison levels, which was our previous historic benchmark flood in Harris County. And so if you're reaching those levels and you're still expecting another 5 to 15 inches of rain, clearly this is going to be a historic situation. And you can also see some of those rainfall totals approaching 10 inches in 3 hours in the southern part of the county. This is Sunday morning about 5 a.m. The radar image here, you can see that initial band that was in the western part of the county had moved across the county and was situated near Galveston Bay. So it had taken it all night to move across the county. And unfortunately, additional bands had developed behind that. The other thing, we started to get a large number of 911 calls about 2 o'clock in the morning into the 911 centers of people saying, I'm going to drown in my house. And in Harris County, we typically don't have life-threatening flooding in homes. Because we're flat, the water spreads out. It doesn't get very deep vertically. Harvey was the exception. Water was very deep in homes, in some cases near the rooftops, down around the Hobby Airport area, Pasadena. And that was not because necessarily of any channels. It was because the rain was falling so fast from the sky, it couldn't run off. It was just piling up. And so we worked with our fire departments to come out with the messaging, coordinated messaging through the TV media that we wanted people to get on their roofs. People were going into their attics. We did not want people going into their attics. We did not want people trapped in their attics and not have a way to get out. And we wanted them to get on their roofs. For that reason, and also from a rescue standpoint, a rescue boat or a helicopter cannot see you in your attic. And addresses at this point were completely ineffective. Most of the addresses are painted on the curb, which are under 4 or 5 feet of water, and even if there were addresses on the homes, those are underwater. So it's very difficult to even find some of these locations without GPS equipment. By 10 a.m. that morning, this is Sunday morning, everything you see in red is major flooding. So this was now a county-wide issue. Not only was it countywide, it was region-wide, Waller County, Fort Bend, Montgomery, Galveston down to our south. As a matter of fact, about 80% of the town of Dickinson in Galveston County was underwater, in very deep water. There was also the realization that every single government asset had been deployed. There were no boats, there were no high water vehicles, there were very few helicopters. All the helicopters locally were doing air rescues. We were requesting helicopters from as far away as Oklahoma City and New Orleans. And so the county judge made the decision to go out and ask for civilian volunteers to go rescue people, which is taking a lot of liability on to take a civilian boat and put it in a swift water rescue situation and try to get as many people as we could into shelters before it got dark. Two of the reasons for this: one, this was already sort of happening. People were going out and rescuing people. And so we had that backlog of 911 calls. We had 53,000 911 calls in 15 hours. In 1 hour, we had 8,900 calls in queue. And so people were going to rescue, and as a government asset would arrive, that area had already been rescued, and so we were kind of wasting resources, if you will. So we tried to consolidate this, set up field command centers where large numbers of people needed to be rescued, and we asked civilians to please call in, give us your name and number and where you're at. We put their name and number on a sticky note on the wall of the Emergency Operations Center, and when we needed resources in a certain area, we pulled from that wall and asked, can you get to this command center? And we launched rescue boats from those locations. The other thing, and this is one of the things that's not written in the plan, is we had a large number of helicopters that were doing rescues, Coast Guard helicopters, National Guard helicopters, and we had to put the folks that they were picking up down somewhere. So the initial shelter that was opened was at the George R. Brown Convention Center, and the closest place to land a helicopter was in the middle of the freeway. So we set up an air traffic control center on the middle of US 59 outside the GRB and landed helicopters about every 8 minutes. And this went on all day Sunday until the GRB reached capacity, and then we overflowed into NRG. And that was the second shelter that was set up Sunday evening. So these are some of the rainfall totals, mind-boggling. We've certainly seen rainfall totals in the short term like this before, but where Harvey separates the difference is in those 2 and 4 day totals. It just kept raining, upwards of 4 feet of rain. Over in the Beaumont-Port Arthur area, they had about 60.5 inches of rain. That's about 12 inches more than what we physically thought could fall out of the sky. There's something called the PMP, probable maximum precipitation. And for southeast Texas, we estimated that was about 48 inches of rain before Harvey. Clearly after Harvey, that's going to have to be redone. So for Harris County, how does this compare to some of our historic benchmark floods? Of course, Allison was the one we thought we would never see outdone, and then we had Harvey. And for the most part, Harvey exceeds Allison in most of those time periods with the rainfall rates. Allison was a little bit more intense in the 6, 12, and 24-hour period. The tax day flood we had back in 16, really there's no comparison at all. And then back in October of 94, we had a very big flood, and I put that on here because of spatial coverage. The size was similar, but Harvey also was more intense. So by far, Harvey was one of the most intense rainfalls we've ever seen. This is the footprint, and everything you see in that black box is 30 inches of rain. And that extends from the Colorado all the way to the Sabine, from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to about Huntsville College Station. So a huge geographic footprint of water that came down. The other way to look at it is spatial coverage. So this is over a 2,000 square mile area for a 5-day period. Harvey produced almost 44 inches of rain. The previous worst storm in American history was in the state of Louisiana in August of 1940, and it produced 29.8 inches of rain for that same 2,000 square miles, 5-day period. Harvey exceeded the previous worst storm in American history by 14 inches. You couldn't even dream this thing up. You just couldn't. Over 10,000 square miles, 5-day period, Harvey produced almost 35 inches of rain. Again, the previous worst storm was in Louisiana in 1940, and it produced about 21 and a half inches. So it exceeded that record by 62%. So in Harris County, we had about 1 trillion gallons of waterfall in 4 days. On average, the entire county had about 34 inches of rain. That's about 68% of what we normally get an entire year in 4 days. And it's 69% of what we physically thought could fall out of the sky. There's one way to measure this also, is called the return frequency. So you hear this a lot. It was a 100-year storm. It was a 500-year storm. Everything you see, and this is for the 24-hour period, everything you see in green is a 1% or 100-year rainfall for Harris County. Harris County, that's 13.2 inches in 24 hours. So Harvey is the only storm that has ever impacted Harris County that has produced a 1% 100-year rainfall across the entire county. If you look at the Tax Day flood, it was in a portion of the county. Memorial Day flood, it was in a portion of the county. October 94, Allison, these are all in segments of the county. Never have we seen the entire county impacted. For the 2-day period, the entire county had a 500-year rainfall going up to about a 5,000-year in the southeast part of the county. And for the storm totals, the 4-day total, the entire county had a 2,000-year event going up to that dark purple area in the southeast part of the county of around 20,000 years, which means it has a very, very small chance of happening in any given year. That's the rain that falls out of the sky. There's also the water that rises in the creeks and the bayous. And so this is how a lot of those floodplains are determined, you hear a lot about. So if you are within the 100-year floodplain, and let's say it's 54 feet, and the water gets to 54 feet in the channel, you suffered a 100-year flood, which means the 100-year floodplain is inundated with water. Everything you see in red, those channels reached their 100-year water surface elevation. Everything you see in purple went to the 500-year. So in a lot of cases, everything was done right. Policies were followed, building designs, all that. Structures and things still flooded. And it's simply because the storm was greater than designed. This was record flooding. Of our 22 watersheds, 13 had records. These were records that were really blown out of the water, especially in the eastern part of the county. We're talking about exceeding the previous records by 5 and 6 feet in some areas. Just unbelievable amounts of water. I'll show some of the images. This is Cypress Creek up on the north side. They just had record flooding in April of 16, the tax day flood. And Harvey came in and was 4 to 5 feet higher than that. So just absolutely devastating. Thousands upon thousands of homes flooded along Cypress Creek. We had one situation, for those familiar with Houston, this is the Hardy Toll Road that goes from north of downtown up to the Woodlands underwater. That's a subdivision that was built in the 2000s to current building standards. All the homes flooded, not because they did anything wrong, but because the creek was higher than what they were designed to build to. And then we have this levee system. This is the Inverness Forest levee, and as you can see, the water came within about 2 inches of overtopping that levee. This was happening on Sunday evening. We were very concerned that this levee was going to be overtopped. I'll point your attention to that little white with the red arrow right there. That is water pushing back through the pump station of the levee and cascading down onto the base of the levee and eroding the levee. And that started happening late Sunday night into Monday morning. Of course, all of these things happened in the middle of the night. And we were very concerned this levee was going to breach. And there's about 200 homes behind that are protected by this levee. And we had to do a mandatory evacuation from this. These are people who were perfectly fine in their homes. They were not flooding. They were dry. But because of the potential for this levee to breach, we had to move them to a shelter about 5 miles away and move them through floodwaters to get them there in the event that this levee breached. And there was lots of talk about what to do with this to prevent a breach from happening, from dropping sandbags from a helicopter to trying to get a bulldozer in there, which it was just too soft to do that. And in the end, what happened? Nothing. We did nothing. And luckily, the levee did not breach. This is the West Fork of the San Jacinto River. This is the Humble area, Humble-Kingwood area. heading up to the north. That's US 59 there. You notice those squiggly lines on the freeway? That's the concrete barriers that were in the middle of the freeway. The water just pushed them right across the freeway. Tremendous flooding, tremendous scour, and tremendous siltation. In some cases, 14 and 15 feet of siltation has been left on the West Fork of the San Jacinto River. Entire homes were completely removed and washed downstream on this portion of the river. This is in the southern part of county, Clear Creek, our border with Galveston County. This is where the 47-4 happened. This is I-45 going to Galveston, which was underwater. The creek is where the red line is. The creek was about 2 miles wide, and about 25,000 homes flooded along Clear Creek alone in Harris, Galveston, and Brazoria counties. Buffalo Bayou is our main channel that runs through downtown Houston. We had a 500-year water level just from the rainfall on Buffalo Bayou, and then there were releases from Addicks and Barker that also resulted in flooding along Buffalo Bayou, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. All of our water for a large portion of the county ends up in the Houston Ship Channel, and I put the tide gauges here at Manchester, which is at 610, and I put Hurricane Ike, 2008, and Harvey in last year, and Harvey actually almost reached Hurricane Ike's seawater storm surge from rainfall. So the Ike storm surge, the seawater, 12.3 feet, that's seawater moving inland from the Gulf of Mexico being pushed up the ship channel. And then Harvey's 12.06 feet was freshwater rainfall running out into the ship channel. So an absolute incredible amount of water. To give you some idea of how amazing this is, the previous storm that produced the high levels in the ship channel from rainfall was Allison, and it was about 5 feet. So tremendous. We had a lot of flooding of our chemical plants in the eastern part of the county. This is the I-10 plant at Cedar Bayou, the ConocoPhillips plant. The entire plant flooded. Oil did leak from this plant and spread down into the city of Baytown. And then our two reservoirs, the flood control reservoirs in the western part of the county. Last year, back in 2016, tax day, they got up right to what we call the edge of the government-owned land. That's what the federal government owns. But the flood pool continues, and there are homes built in that flood pool, very similar to Lake Travis. And this time, the water was 6.5 feet higher. So the water came off government-owned land. It inundated the homes in the flood pool, and in some cases, those homes had up to 6.5 feet of water in them. So a devastating flood event for that. On one of the reservoirs, Addicks, the spillway was engaged. The spillways have never been engaged before. They're concrete armored spillways that tie into natural ground. And as the water got so high in the north end of Addicks, the water just simply spilled out in the natural ground through the subdivisions and then flowed down to Buffalo Bayou. And we weren't really sure how exactly that was going to happen because first, it's never happened before. And second, you have a very complex interaction of neighborhoods, commercial developments, detention basins, underground drainage systems, roadside ditches to put all this water into. And so it was very complicated on how the water was going to flow. Similar thing in Barker. This is the southern reservoir, similar 6.5 feet above the previous record. And this was tremendous flooding in the Fort Bend County section in the Cinco Ranch area. About 3,400 homes flooded down in there. So for damages, just in Harris County alone, we estimate between 100 and 140,000 homes flooded. Comparison to Tropical Storm Allison of 73,000, by far the worst structure flood event we've ever had. About 300,000 vehicles were flooded in Harris County. Harvey is going to come in as the number 2. The second worst storm based on damages behind Katrina, which will remain number 1 at $160 billion. So Harvey's around 125. That's still up for debate, but that's what the latest from the Hurricane Center suggest. And I put on there the number of persons rescued. Those are rescued in Harris County only by government resources. 60,000 people were pulled from homes and from roofs. And we think at least another 30,000 to 40,000 were rescued by civilian boats. And so a very large, massive rescue effort was done in the days following Harvey. A couple things I'll go through real quick. I'll try to tie these back to not just flooding. When you get into an emergency situation, you do a lot of briefings. I'll remind everyone that briefings they have the word brief in them to keep them short. We were sitting on some briefings that were going on sometimes for an hour. And when you have 15 or 16 briefings to do a day, you don't have time to spend an hour on a conference call or a webinar going through everybody's question about something that's already been said. So make sure if you're ever responsible for doing briefings, try to keep them brief. I recommend 15 to 20 minutes with questions at max. If people have questions, they can call you on side. Partners are extremely important. You cannot do this stuff on your own. You cannot dream up some of the things that are going to happen in a historic event, and you have to be able to count on the people that can support you and come in and offer you help. And so they're very important. With everything as high-tech as we have today, social media, email, text messaging, I still use pen and paper. And that message right there, I wrote down from Fort Bend County and took a picture on my phone and texted it back to Fort Bend County so we could both be saying the same thing when we went out to do TV media interviews. Because that's the quickest thing that we had available to us at that moment. I had a computer, but I didn't have the person's email address. I had his phone number. So pen and paper still works. The media is incredibly important. It used to be when I started the flood control district 15 years ago, we kept the media outside. We didn't let them in the building. Now we bring them in the building. We feed them. When they eat. We offer them a place to sleep. We're very kind to the media. And it's a two-way street. They need information. They need you to provide information. And we have information that we need to provide and get out. And so it works very well. We have a good relationship. We build this relationship with them on days like today when nothing's happening. So when things do happen, they have some knowledge of what we're talking about and that type of stuff. I'll tell you right now, in an event like Harvey, you have a lot of national and international coverage, and those folks have no clue what a bayou is, or what a creek is, or what a floodplain is, because they don't live here locally. And so you have to do a lot of education and explaining some of the simple terms when talking to international media. The other thing to try to get control of some of the chaos, because we had so many media requests to do interviews, is we established briefing times. We are going to brief every day, 3 times a day, in the morning, around noon, and in the evening. And so that cut down on the constant barrage of, can you do an interview, can you do an interview, can you do an interview, every 5 or 10 minutes that we were getting. And so it helped us. We had to go, do other work. We planned for these media briefings, and then we moved on. There were still interviews that were being done, and all totaled, about 980 interviews were conducted in Harris County. Press releases are another big thing. You have to get the press releases out, the information out. And you need to do it as timely as you can. Social media was big. I joined Twitter back in 2015, and did it kicking and screaming, not wanting to do it. But I can tell you it works very effectively in a disaster emergency situation, so that you can get information directly to the folks that need it. And the good thing about it, you can put pictures on it, and you can say, the reason I'm telling you to evacuate is because on the other side of that hill that you did not know was a levee is all of this water. And if it continues to rise, it's going to go over the top of that and come down into your house. That's why we're asking you to leave. So it's very effective. It's not a good place to get into discussions, and we really tried not to discuss things too much. Twitter is not built for that. It's meant to push out information, really. People can ask a question, you can answer it, but it's not to really discuss. One of the biggest ones that we kept having was, our attics and barker failing? Our attics and barker failing? And the simple answer kept being just no. It was simply just no. One thing I'll say about it, it does require staff, and it requires you to be on all the time. Twitter never goes to sleep. Facebook never goes to sleep. And so in an emergency situation, those platforms are constantly engaged. And so you have to have staff that can engage in those platforms. If you look at just traditional TV media, you can kind of like I said, organize how you're going to talk and when you're going to go out and speak. And then you can say at 10 o'clock tonight, we're not doing any more interviews so we can get some rest. It doesn't work that way necessarily with social media. So lastly, some of the lessons learned. How do you comprehend a historic event you've never faced before, and how do you message that? That was quite difficult. Social media engagement, we talked about that. Plans and procedures, I'm sure you all have plans and procedures. Follow them, because there will be litigation in the aftermath. But there are going to be things that happen that you did not expect. There are going to be things that happen that you did not ever think you were going to deal with. And you have to just do, in many cases, what's right. It may not be the appropriate thing to do, or you may worry about later if there's going to be a lawsuit filed or if something's going to go wrong. But at that point in time, you have to do what's right. Partnerships matter. We talked about that. And communication. You have to communicate. You have to communicate to your public. You have to communicate with your partners. Communication is key. And I'll leave you with this final note. You can do everything right in your office, but if you do not communicate, you're going to fail on the public perception.